to talk about our last macronutrient, protein. Here we go. So protein, it's very different as far as its purpose in the body, as opposed to the purpose of carbohydrates and fats. Fats play a big role in structure of the cells, but they also have, I would say, a primary role in ATP production, so the fuel for ATP. And we know that carbohydrates pretty much just provide ATP, right? So this energy production role of fats and carbs are different. So protein does not do that. I mean, it can. We'll talk about the situations when it will. But its main role in the body is to be the structures. So every little hormone, enzyme, cellular organelle, tissue, everything has protein as its material. I like to think of it as, if we're going to build a house, or if we're going to build a shed or a garage, or whatever structure or building that we're going to build, we need lumber, right? We need fasteners, we need concrete, we need brick, we need roofing, we need siding, we need all these materials, right? That is our proteins, okay? So the materials are the amino acids that make up the proteins. So your lumber, your fasteners, your concrete, those are amino acids. So I want you to kind of visualize that as we're going through all of the protein functions, or most of the protein functions in the body, as it being this structure, or this material that makes structures. So I'm going to save the topic of protein digestion and metabolism for next week. And so today we're going to talk about the role it has in the body, and talk about the protein molecular structure, and then the different categories of protein, as well as what you need for your intake. So here we go. Number one, protein is integral in cellular repair and regeneration. So our cells can get damaged by exercise. Oxidative damage from exercise actually affects our cells. Environmental toxins, bacteria, viruses, all sorts of things can damage your cells, and they have the ability to repair themselves, but they need the protein to build those structures that are their repair. Also, your cells have a lifespan. So some cells last for 6 hours, some cells last for 6 months, and then any duration in between. And so we're constantly producing new cells in all of our body systems, and protein is what provides the material for that production. So good example, who moved here from sea level or lower elevation? Yeah, so when you moved to Gunnison to adapt to the altitude, you had to produce more red blood cells. Otherwise, you would be constantly breathing hard and suffering, right? And so protein is needed to generate these new cells. So we go from sea level with the red blood cell count that we have, and we go to Gunnison, and we have to have more in order for us to transport that oxygen to our tissues. So without the protein available in the body, these functions would be hindered. And these are obviously very important functions right here: cellular repair and regeneration, and just production itself. So all the organelles that are in the cell, they take protein to build those, to build their structures as well. So next, enzymes and hormones. So let's first talk about what an enzyme is. So an enzyme is a molecular compound, and its role is to facilitate or speed up chemical reactions in the body, okay? So our metabolism is just a whole slew of different chemical reactions. When we were learning the energy systems, remember the slides, there was all sorts of chemical reactions displayed on the slides, and it's like, oh my gosh. And so all of these reactions have an enzyme that facilitates it and also makes it work faster. Without these enzymes, these chemical reactions wouldn't happen. For an example, anybody recognize this chemical reaction right here? Anybody take 330?
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember what all of these letters stand for? No. So this is one of the chemical reactions of the phosphagen system. So this is creatine phosphate, our substrate, added to an ADP with a hydrogen. The enzyme is creatine kinase, and it produces ATP with the byproduct of creatine, which we regenerate in phosphorylate. So this enzyme right here, to have the enzyme, that compound takes protein material. So our enzymes are protein. If we don't have the protein, then we don't have the enzymes, and we don't have good function of those chemical reactions. So all of you that are athletes or are interested in improving your fitness, enzymatic adaptations are one of the adaptations that come with training. So you will actually produce more of the specific enzymes that facilitate those energy system reactions, therefore making you fitter, making you able to produce ATP more and faster and more efficiently. So we actually produce more enzymes as we adapt to stress and get fitter. So hormones, we've mentioned a couple in our digestive talk on carbohydrates, but let's use the example of insulin. Insulin is a hormone. A hormone is another chemical compound that's released from a gland in our body, and it's released into the bloodstream. And the hormones are kind of these like chemical messengers that go to whatever target structure in the body they're aimed at, and they tell that structure what to do. They tell that organ what to do. And so in the case of insulin, insulin takes glucose out of the blood and will then deliver it into the cell, right? That's its purpose. So insulin, the actual production of hormone, takes protein. Protein is the material that makes insulin. It makes all of those hormones. Well, not all of them. Some hormones are lipid-based. We talked about a few of them earlier. But insulin and glucagon, those for glucose management, are protein-based. So what happens if we don't have protein available in either of these situations is we have some major functions that get hindered, right? And so we have to be able to supply from our food what our body needs to produce all of these structures. So number 3, let's talk about cell membrane transporters. So there's a few that we mentioned, the GLUT4 transporter, the sarcolemmal fatty acid binding protein. So basically they are the gates that are lined around the membrane of the cell that allow certain molecules in and out. So these transporters are protein. They are protein structures, all of our transporters. We have tons of them. This is just an example of a couple, right? Things that you might be familiar with. And so every transporter is specific to what molecule or thing is letting in or out of the cell. So the GLUT4 transporter is going to let a glucose molecule in. That's what its job is, but it's not going to let a fatty acid in. That's a different transporter that's specific to that. Your sodium-potassium pump. Who recognizes a sodium-potassium pump? It's a very, very helpful transporter that we have, especially on our neurons, that allows our neurons to depolarize and then repolarize, and therefore send electrical impulses down. This is basically how we send electrical messages from neuron to neuron, is this transfer of these ions of sodium and potassium. So the transporter that makes that happen is protein. And so if we don't have, again, what we need, if we don't have the protein available, then a lot of this stuff suffers. So let's talk about immunity. Who here has gotten the flu this winter?
I think I got it. Not
think you
now.
have it right
but
now?
No, not now.
Okay, hopefully you won't get any flu. hopefully you've had it before, and therefore you've built the antibodies for it. So our antibodies are these things that our immune system will produce in response to an invasion from some foreign thing, like bacteria, viruses, toxins, things like that. And so we will produce antibodies when that invader comes into our body that is specific to that invader, so that it can be a very efficient fighter of that invader. And so these structures are antibodies, and they are protein. Again, another use for protein. We make antibodies out of protein. If we don't have the protein, then our immune system suffers. Blood clotting and wound healing. Who here has heard about clotting factors? Yeah, clotting factors are protein. So essentially, if you cut your blood vessel, or the blood vessel, is wounded somehow, you will bleed, right? Unless you form a clot in order to stop that bleeding. And so we have all these proteins that float around in our bloodstream called clotting factors, and there's a bunch of different ones. And there's anti-clotting factors and there's clotting factors, and they work in unison with each other to develop the amount of clot and dissolve the amount of clot that's needed for that wound to heal. So the very, very integral in survival, so that we don't bleed out, right? If we don't have clotting factors, then our wound healing and the blood clotting function suffers. Nerve function. Again, back to our nerves. When a neuron receives an impulse, it'll receive it at the dendrite. Dendrite's crazy on this neuron. And then that impulse is going to head down the axon to the synaptic knob, and that synaptic knob is going to release chemicals called neurotransmitters. You guys should be familiar with this. Neurotransmitters are protein. Acetylcholine. All those neurotransmitters that you're familiar with are protein. Without the protein available, we don't have what we need, we don't have the materials to produce these neurotransmitters. A lot of times if you think about this, or all the time you think about this, we're generating this stuff all the time. It's not like we have just neurotransmitters sitting around. Sometimes there are some stored in the neuron, but we generate it a lot, okay? So we have to have some supply of protein somewhere in order for us to produce these structures. Muscles. Who likes big muscles, right? Guns out, guns out. Yeah. When we exercise, when we do things that stress our muscles, they tear. And that way we are able to then rebuild it into a larger and more strong structure. Protein is what makes up the filaments of actin and myosin, so that we can have more contractile protein, or more contractile filaments, so that we can get stronger and muscles can get bigger. We have to have that for muscle growth, and even just to maintain the muscle mass that we have right now. Your body is very economical, and so if you were, say, to be training and exercising and then you stop, your body's going to be like, well, it's really expensive to keep all this muscle around, and so it's going to start to atrophy the muscle because it doesn't want that cost. And so protein is helpful in preventing atrophy, as well as adapting to the stress of exercise, say if you were trying to get bigger muscles and stronger muscles, right? On that note, who here is an athlete? Who here has suffered injuries from your sport? Were they connective tissue joint injuries, typically? Yeah, I mean, it's super common. And so our ligaments, our tendons, the cartilage in our joints, all of that connective tissue that make up our joints are full of protein fibers. If we are deficient in protein, our connective tissue suffers, and then it makes us more susceptible to injury. And say we were to be injured, and then if we didn't have protein, it would be even more difficult to repair that connective tissue. It already takes a long time. So we need that protein for that too. On that note of training, when someone is trying to improve their aerobic fitness, they're going to train a specific way, usually during aerobic exercise. And what happens in your body is you end up getting an adaptation in your mitochondria. Your mitochondria is that organelle in your cell that is super, efficient at producing ATP, produces a ton of ATP, and it processes the oxygen. So when you train, you actually produce more mitochondria as a training adaptation, and you can produce larger mitochondria. And so to make all those, or to make that organelle bigger, or make more of them, it takes protein. And so if you are an athlete, or you exercise regularly, or you just want to stay fit, protein is absolutely important for maintaining those adaptations. So now let's talk about ATP. So protein for ATP, question mark? Here's the situation. In the event that someone is getting the amount of carbohydrates and fats that they need for ATP, protein will be spared. It doesn't want to use protein because it has all these other roles that it can only do. So your body's not going to want to delve into that supply and make all those other functions suffer. However, in the instance of a low energy availability, say someone is not getting the carbohydrates and fats that they need, your body will dip into the protein that you have. And so that could be the protein in your muscle mass. It could be the protein in your connective tissue. It could be the protein that's producing these enzymes and these hormones. Like your body is going to take it away from those structures so that it can generate ATP, because we obviously need that for survival. And so you end up like dipping into these pots that you really shouldn't dip into in that low energy availability state. Now, starvation situations, this is when this happens, or individuals that are not consuming the amount of carbs and fats they need for the exercise output that they are doing. And so they will be in a deficit of energy due to that excess output. So especially for people that are training, it's very important that your energy is in balance, right? Your carbs and your fats. So let's talk about how this happens. So in your body, if you were in a low energy state, write that down here, or low energy availability, meaning not enough carbs and fats in the diet, your body is going to take the protein from the structures that it already has. This protein is going to then get sent to the liver, where it goes through a process called deamination. And basically it'll remove part of that protein so that it's left with some remnants. We'll talk about what that is in just a second when we go over the structure. And these remnants can become carbohydrates. And then carbohydrates can be your fuel for glycolysis and eventually mitochondrial respiration. And you can make ATP. So, anybody remember the name of this process when we produce new carbohydrates or new glucose from, say, protein or maybe lactate or glycogen? Got it. Gluconeogenesis. So in these instances of low energy availability, our liver will make this happen because it's absolutely imperative to produce ATP and have the fuels to produce it for survival. So we try to avoid this, obviously, but in certain times it could happen. All right, make sure that was everything. note, there is a situation that's pretty common in female athletes. When female athletes are in a chronic state of low energy availability, this process will happen. And a lot of times what will happen is this protein that is being salvaged from the body will come from hormone production, and that hormone is estrogen. And so it's kind of a unnecessary system in the body at the time, and so reproduction and the menstrual cycle like suffer first. And so the females will lose their menstrual cycle because they are basically pulling that protein supply from those processes and those functions. And so in that instance, it's pretty common actually. And it's due to a low energy availability. And there's some detrimental cascade effects that happen if a female stays in that state for a long time. All right. Let's now talk about what a protein actually looks like. So when I say protein, what I'm talking about is a chain of amino acids that are bonded together via a peptide bond, okay? So the simplest structure of protein is this amino acid. And so an amino acid, what it looks like is you have this central carbon atom right here. Then you're gonna have these 4 groups that are attached to it. You have an amine group, you have an acid group, you have a hydrogen, and then you have this thing called a side chain, okay? And so one amino acid is gonna have all those structures within it. And so if you imagine this being one, and next, and then it would be bonded to another amino acid, it would look something like amino acid, peptide bond, amino acid, peptide bond, so on and so on, okay? Now, before we talk about how many amino acids and stuff like that, let's talk about how this chain structures itself. Like the primary structure is going to look like this. And that's what and you can actually, page 185 in your book, if you have that handy, take a look at it, because I didn't want to even try to draw it because I would botch it severely. But they have some good images to kind of give you an idea of what this would look like. But the primary structure of a protein is going to be this sequence of amino acids that are connected via those peptide bonds, okay? Could be 4, could be 20, whatever. And then you've got this secondary structure. And so these hydrogens that are on these amino acids are actually attracted to each other. And so it's gonna cause this chain of amino acids to coil and spiral upon itself. And so this secondary structure is gonna be this spiralization due to that, those hydrogens bonding with each other. Next, what'll happen is these hydrogen bonds or hydrogen atoms are also gonna be attracted to a sulfur bond that's in there, or it's gonna bond with a sulfur atom. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna take this slinky-like looking spiral and then fold it upon itself. So if you imagine if you've got like a slinky in your hand, it's a spiral, right? And you were to pick it up and then fold it back down, and it would fold, that would be this, the tertiary structure of a protein. Now a lot of proteins will end at this point, and this will be the last, I would say, way that it can be structured. And so when this tertiary structure, and kind of actually the sequence of amino acids as well as how this folds and spirals is what determines what that function of that protein is. It determines if it becomes a neurotransmitter. It determines if it becomes a hormone or an enzyme or a cellular organelle or a connective tissue. And so the shape of it is going to determine its function. Now occasionally you're going to have a quaternary structure, and this is basically when a protein chain is attracted to another protein chain, and then you end up with this additional structure categorization. And so so it's like two chains or more than one chains joining together. The book gives an example as your actin and myosin filaments are quaternary structures. All right, so now let's talk specifically about these amino acids. If you have your book, go ahead and pull it out, because I'd like you to take a look at page 181. Does anyone have their book? No one has their book. Kira has her book. All right. On page 181, you'll see the list of all of the essential amino acids, or sorry, all of the amino acids that exist. And there's 20, okay? I'm not gonna name them all and which ones are which, but you will need to know this list on page 181. So we've got 20 amino acids, okay? 9 of those 20 are considered essential, and 11 are considered non-essential. So who remembers why a nutrient might be considered essential?
Because you can only get it from food.
Yeah, you can only get it from your food. Your body can't create it on its own. And so something that is non-essential, your body actually can create from other parts and pieces that are in there. But the essential nutrients are things that we have to get from our food. So there's nine of these amino acids that we have to eat in order for us to have them, and we need them all, right? So there is one more category, and it's called a conditionally essential amino acid. And so this being conditional is very situational, and it's the time when a non-essential amino acid will become an essential amino acid, okay? And this is usually when the body is in some sort of state of stress or illness or disease or organ failure. And what it means is that the precursors that it takes to make these non-essential amino acids are not available for some reason. This illness or disease or failure is disrupting that process, and therefore your body can't produce that non-essential amino acid anymore, and therefore it becomes conditionally essential. Got it? So the way your body produces non-essential amino acids is it will take an amino acid and it'll remove the amine group, and then it will attach it to another molecule, which ends up creating a different amino acid. And that is how it's kind of just, that's called transamination. So deamination would be the taking away of that amine group. Transamination would be transferring it from one amino acid to another molecule to create a new amino acid. That's essentially how our body does this with amino acids that we have kind of in the amino acid pool. So now these 20 amino acids are all going to have this same amine acid and hydrogen, but what's going to make them differentiated is what's called the side chain, okay? So like arginine is going to have a different side chain than leucine. Valine is going to have a different side chain than isoleucine. And so all of them are going to be different specific to that side chain there. So now, let's talk about proteins in our food. So we can get protein from animal meat, we can get protein from animal products, and we can also get protein from plants. So it's in everything that we have available to us. But these foods that contain protein will differ by the content that it has per serving, so how many grams of protein per serving. Some will be more, some will be less. And then also, which of those amino acids does it actually contain? So some proteins will have a ton of amino acids, some proteins will have just a couple, and then every variation in between. And so these amino acids, we've got 20, right? And your body produces over 50,000 different proteins from combinations of those 20. And so it's pretty, almost infinite, it seems like, that of what your body can produce, because it depends on the sequence and then how it gets shaped up on itself. So let's talk about how those differ in food. So your goal, obviously, every day is to get the content of protein that you need, so how, like the grams that you need per day. And then you also need to get all 9 of your essential amino acids, because remember, we don't produce those. We have to get them from our food, and they're essential to all of these functions. And if we don't eat them, then we're selling ourselves short, and we have a deficiency in something. And so what foods actually have all 9 essential amino acids? They're considered complete proteins. So a complete protein will have all 9, and then an incomplete protein will have some, okay? So what are our complete proteins? What do you guys think? Fish, chicken, beef, eggs, butter, dairy. What's this look like? Animal meat and animal products, right? So animal meat and animal products are complete proteins. They contain all 9 of our essential amino acids in one serving, okay? There are 2 plant complete proteins that exist, and that is soy products, such as tofu or tempeh, and then also quinoa, which is a grain, is a complete protein. Now, incomplete protein is going to be, any veggie and fruit that is not quinoa and soy. Nuts, seeds, legumes, and grains. Pretty much every other plant product that isn't quinoa and soy are incomplete proteins. So, how do we meet our needs? How do we get the 9 that we need? Well, we can either eat animal meat and products, or we could eat soy and quinoa, or we could eat a combination of these incompletes. So legumes are gonna have a different list of essential amino acids than grains are. And so if you eat them together, then you get all of your 9. Seeds and grains, legumes have a lot, and so they're a good complement to anything else. So like legumes and grains, legumes and vegetables, nuts and seeds. And so if, so say someone is vegan. And so veganism means that this individual doesn't want to eat any animal meat or animal products. So it'll be a plant-based, plant-only diet. And so for that individual to get the essential amino acids that they would need, they would have to eat either soy and quinoa every day, or a combination of these incompletes. And it takes quite a bit of research and time and calculation to figure out exactly what essential amino acids are in the foods that you're eating, so that you can find these complementary proteins so that you get all the essential amino acids for the day. Another eating pattern would be vegetarianism. And so vegetarianism is no animal meat, but animal products are included. And so this individual could get the essential amino acids from eggs, or dairy products, or cheese, something like that. And so for those 2 eating patterns, it takes a bit more work. However, it is doable. It is doable to be vegetarian and get all of your protein and amino acids that you want, and it is possible to be vegan and get all the essential amino acids and protein that you need. But it takes a bit more work and a bit of research. It's commonly not done. And individuals that eliminate all animal products and animal meat tend to have a deficiency in protein unless they are doing that work it takes to find what they need. But it is possible. So let's talk about now what you need, okay? So protein recommendations in our dietary guidelines, the RDAs for protein, they're gonna be displayed two different ways. They're gonna be given as an AMDR, so that percentage range of your calories. So what is the RDA AMDR, or the AMDR for protein?
10 to 35.
You got it. So the AMDR is 10% to 35%. Now the second way that this can be presented is in how many grams per kilogram of your body weight that you need per day. So right now, our RDA says 0.8 to 1.0 grams per kilogram of your body weight of protein. However, recent research, and actually there's a good body of research that supports this, is that this is too low for general population and absolutely too low for regular exercisers and athletes. And so the research now shows that a minimum of 1.2 grams per kilogram is recommended, and up to 2.2 grams per kilogram is beneficial for some. Now this would be someone that is training, or someone that is trying to increase hypertrophy, muscle mass. Also, this recommendation, or this higher end recommendation, is being delivered for older adults. Older adults, at a certain point in their life, will start to lose muscle mass just due to age. And so it's unfortunate, it happens to everyone. And so having the protein available in the body is absolutely necessary to mitigate that muscle mass loss. So let's do this. So I want you to calculate your, let's start with this one right here. Let's go with this recommendation right here for everyone. Well, actually, you can decide. Let's start with your body weight. Okay, so you probably know what your body weight is in pounds, right? So you're gonna divide your body weight by 2.2, and that's gonna give you your body weight in kilograms. Do that calculation for yourself. Now that you got your body weight in kilograms, if you are not that active, then you could use this amount of 1.2 grams per kilogram. But if you feel like you are active, especially if you're training, you can go up to a higher range of 1.8, 2.0, 2.2. You decide. This range is fine for everyone. So decide what you would like to calculate this as, and then multiply that number by your body weight in kilograms. And this should give you how many grams of protein per day you should take in. target that you can use, when you are reading your nutrition labels and you are, trying to calculate and track your macros, and you can see if you can reach that target. So now let's kind of go backwards, and let's figure out how that relates to your percentage of kcals per day, okay? So all of you have figured out what your calorie level is. You have that number already written down somewhere. And so once you get this grams of protein per day, how would we go backwards to get to that? How would we convert our grams of protein to kcals of protein?
Times it by 4.
Good. So then multiply this by 4, which is how many kcals per gram of protein? So then to calculate what percentage of your total calories this attributes to, you would then divide this number that you got right here, the product of this, by your calorie level. So if you, your calorie level is 2,000 calories per day, or 2,200 calories per day, or 1,800 calories per day, whatever it is, take this number and divide it by that calorie level, and it'll give you a decimal, and that should be your percentage attributed to protein out of your macros. Throw out some percentages when you get it. What'd you get? 26? 19? There's no right or wrong answer. It is what you chose. But yeah, remember that range of 10% to 35%. Most likely you came up with something that is within this. And this can kind of give you more, let's say, acuity on how you would want to distribute your macros. Cool. So let's talk about a few foods just to kind of get an idea of how many grams are in stuff. So I calculated a diet, a vegetarian daily food diet here that reached 100 grams. So this was for a 175-pound guy. 100 grams of protein for this individual. He's not very active, he's not very, he's not training, and so kind of went with the lower number. So 100 grams was his allocation of protein. So this individual ate 3 eggs, 2 slices of toast with almond butter on it for breakfast. And for lunch, he had broccoli, mixed nuts, and then dipped that broccoli in a cup of hummus. Then he had some dates for dessert, a cup of dates. And then for dinner, he had quinoa with Brussels sprouts and tofu in it with an avocado on top. And it came to 107.3 grams of protein. And it ended up having a few complete proteins in there. You had eggs, you had tofu, you had quinoa. And so this was a good balanced diet for someone that is vegetarian. You know, for someone that would be vegan, you'd have to take those eggs out, obviously, and find, you know, another substitute for that. But still, the quinoa and the tofu would give that individual their protein. Now, say this individual was not vegetarian. 3 eggs, same breakfast, toast with almond butter, lentil soup for breakfast, and then for dinner, he had chicken breast and a cup of rice, Brussels sprouts, and broccoli sauteed in there. 121 grams of protein, and had those complete proteins of eggs and chicken. So like chicken breast, like a serving of chicken breast is like 40 grams of protein. An egg is like 6 grams of protein. Cup of nuts is like 8 grams of protein. And I give you some ideas. You know, the vegetables and the plant-based proteins are going to be less grams per serving, so probably to eat more to get your need, especially if you're an athlete. If you don't eat meat, but the meats tend to be a kind of good bang for your buck, getting the grams that you questions? So you multiply by 4, and that's gonna give you a kcal measurement, like how many kcals you're getting from your protein. And then to figure out what percentage that would be out of your total calorie, divide that number by your total calorie, daily calorie amount. Your calorie level, what you calculated for your intake per day. You get that percentage, which is kind of like your AMPR.